new study looks into the number of exonerations here in the United States and what percentage of people who get exonerated, these are individuals who are wrongfully convicted and then later released due to DNA evidence, what percentage of them are black versus white? Well, I'm sure you know the answer to that, but the statistics are pretty insane. So a new report from the National Registry of Exonerations, a joint project between the University of California, Irvine, University of Michigan Law School, and Michigan State University College of Law, shows that black people are more likely to be wrongfully convicted than white people and are also likely to spend longer in prison before being exonerated for their crimes. This is the statistic that I guess shouldn't have shocked me, but it did, because the numbers are startling. While black people represent 13% of the US population, they represent a whopping 47% of the 1900 exonerations in the registry. So they looked at 3 specific crimes in their analysis, the researchers did. They looked at murder, they looked at rape, and also drug crimes. And so these are people who have been exonerated, convicted and then exonerated of all 3 crimes, right? Here are the numbers. Innocent blacks are 7 times more likely to be convicted of murder than innocent white people. This was partly because homicide rates among black people are higher than among white people, and innocent black people are therefore more likely to get suspected and convicted of murder. So this basically has to do with certain biases. If you see that black people are more likely to get convicted for murder, well, then you're more likely to assume that a black person is a suspect, and that person is more likely to get tried, and then the biases in the trial system likely will get that person wrongfully convicted.
And look, sometimes in some of these categories, blacks are convicted at higher rates and are in prison at higher rates because of selective enforcement. So drugs is a perfect example of that. Whites and blacks do drugs at the same rates, but as you're about to, well, first of all, we know that blacks are put in prison at 4 times the rate of whites, even though they do it at the same rate. Now, part of the reason for that is there's more law enforcement in poorer neighborhoods. Blacks tend to live on average in more poor neighborhoods, so there's cops everywhere. Whereas in your suburbs where people are doing either pot or coke or whatever they're doing, or hillbilly heroin, whatever it might be, there aren't as many cops and they're not constantly trying to fill quotas for arrests, etc. And then there are assumptions and stereotypes.
Yes.
And so selective enforcement makes all the difference. So that is in the people arrested and put in jail. Now wait till you see the ones that are done wrong and how much that is disparate for blacks. And it just told you the murder ones, but let's go over the other 2.
So real quick, before we leave the topic of murder, murder cases where a black defendant was wrongfully convicted were 22% more likely to involve police misconduct than those involving white defendants. This is not a comment, this is not opinion, these are facts based on analysis of people who were wrongfully convicted and the forces at play behind that wrongful conviction.
Yeah, it's not like the researchers looked at him and was like, I think the cop did the wrong thing there. No, it was a court case where the guy was let go and the state says, sorry, we were wrong, because usually of DNA evidence, but in some cases, police misconduct. We found that there was police misconduct, we're now letting you out of jail. Yeah. So that's why it is an absolute fact. So if you are a white person in America who did not have the police ever abuse you or treat you wrong, you're probably wondering, I don't get it, the cops protect you, why don't they like the cops? Why don't they trust the cops? Because that is not their experience.
And also
22% of the cases were because the police decided, I'm gonna go get this guy, even though he's innocent.
And for white individuals who don't understand this and haven't experienced it, that is exactly what, dare I say it, what white privilege is, right? That doesn't mean that you're a bad person, that just means that there are certain obstacles that you haven't had to deal with, certain biases that you didn't have to deal with, right? You've gotten the benefit of the doubt. Doesn't mean you're a bad person, doesn't mean you didn't earn everything that you have in your life. It just means that you were treated a little fairer by the system.
It doesn't mean you're a millionaire and driving around Bentleys. You could be dirt poor and still not get as mistreated as African Americans, not get convicted wrongly as much as African Americans. It's a privilege that's invisible, you can't even see it, because a cop doesn't come and crack you over the skull and throw you in jail. One of the guys that they talk about, 15 years for rape, and he didn't do it, And so then they're like, oops, sorry, wrong guy, DNA proved you're innocent and it's the other guy, you're out of jail, but we already destroyed your life. So it's a weird thing to call that privilege that didn't happen to you. But it is, I mean, look at the numbers. So again, murder numbers, very stark.
So let's go to
7 times more likely to be convicted of murder wrongly if you're black.
Yes. So let's now move on to the issue of sexual assault and rape. According to the analysis, black people serving time for sexual assault are 3.5 times more likely to be innocent than white defendants that have been convicted of sexual assault. The bulk of the racial disparities in sexual assault convictions can be explained by white victims who mistakenly identify black assailants. So this is very important because I think a lot of times people put a lot of weight behind witness testimony or a witness identifying the suspect. But in a lot of cases, especially if the victim was a white person, they will misidentify the suspect.
No, it's actually, and I've read different studies about this. It's if the person is of a different race. So black people have almost as much trouble telling white people apart as white people have of telling black people apart, also Asians, etc. So when it's 2 different races, they just haven't been acclimated enough to different faces of those races because they don't live with them enough, etc. So they will make mistakes at a much higher percentage. And so you think, oh, it's a witness, it must be true. Not necessarily the case, especially the victim in a sexual assault, how could they not know? But the DNA exonerated them in all these cases. No, in a lot of cases, it is mistaken identity. Look, that is what they could prove and that's why they wrote that. So now this is my opinion. Look, I think stereotypes also make a big difference here. Because what are the ugly stereotypes they have said about black people for all this time? They're violent, and they will rape your woman. I mean, that goes all the way back to The Birth of a Nation, the first long feature film ever made, where there's a white person dressed up in blackface going around raping white women. I mean, that is a stereotype almost as old as America itself. And so when you have these stereotypes built in the back of our heads, is it that surprising that blacks get convicted of murder 7 times more wrongly than whites and 3.5 times more in sexual assault cases? Then you've got drugs.
Yes.
And drugs are even worse in this case.
So keep in mind that when it comes to certain types of drugs like marijuana, and we've stated this on the show repeatedly, blacks and whites use marijuana at similar rates. But blacks are more likely to get arrested and convicted for possession of marijuana, 4 times more likely. Now, according to this analysis, when it comes to drug crimes, innocent blacks were 12 times more likely to be convicted than innocent whites.
So not only are they targeted more, but they are even more disproportionately the victims of injustice. And so when they bring that issue up or we bring that issue up, it's not a matter of asking to be a victim. Nobody asked to get put in jail and wrongly convicted of either selling drugs or committing rape or committing murder and losing a big chunk of their lives. It wasn't some sort of grand strategy to have a victim complex. They were actually victimized, and it was actual significant injustice at a different rate than other races in this country. So let's just acknowledge it so that if we're decent human beings, we could actually work towards a solution. Let's go take on the corporate media. Come join us, be a member, and change the media. TYTnetwork.com/join.